Do we want to get into like more drawing or more painting kind of stuff? Like, as far as any preference? No? Tony, just do your thing. All right. I'm going to start off and talk about getting started in watercolor real quickly then, and like how some of the techniques and things that we can learn to do so. And then I'll go through that relatively quick, and if you need any additional questions, we can kind of go back. But near the end of it, we'll do some examples, and that's where I'll call in some, I'll be your AI prompt bot for the moment, and we can do either questions or I'll just ramble on. But at the end of the day, thank you so much for coming. Real quick on the tools, right? This is just a small thing of water, and one of the things I really despise with the internet sometimes is when people post their watercolors and you see some great cool watercolors and they have a little tiny cup of water. You need a lot of water for watercolors. That's just for show. In my studio, I have a large, almost bucket of it, but you want clean water whenever you can. Change it out. Don't use that cute little teacup with floral design patterns on it or whatever else. Even this is barely large enough for what I normally do. So first off, clean water. Second are our brushes. There are two types of brushes. And I forgot the second one here. Here we go. In general, for most of what my work, I work with two brushes, two types of brushes. One is a flat, right? And the other is called a round. There's a whole bunch of other series of brushes in the world, cat's tongue, angled, slanted, all these other things. But with these two things, I create 98% of the brush strokes on my page. With that, a round is the most used. In general, you want at least two sizes. You want a large one to fill up the page and large areas, right? And you need a smaller one for details, right? Ideally, the same one for a flat brush. One of the challenges with watercolor when you're starting off on that journey is that people use too many brush strokes and use too small of a brush for the page that they have. This is the largest one I travel with, but in my studio I have one that's probably about twice as wide for large areas. The larger the area you want to cover, the larger the brush you want, right? What we'll see, and we'll do this now, is we'll create a flat wash right now, right? And so if I have a large area, I generally want to work at some sort of an angle. So I'm just going to use this for a moment. We'll use this pair of sunglasses that someone left, and we'll raise it a little bit more. All right. So in general, I like working at a little bit of an angle for these washes. And if you're closest in the front row, if for some reason on the screen there I'm not centered or I've gone off, so I can't see, just kind of give me a signal or raise your hand or something at me, because sometimes I'm like a little off, right? So in this case, I want to make sure I am on, so I'm here. So if there's a large area, we want to make sure that our brush is plenty wet. And one of the things I'm going to do is there's a drop of water that kind of comes down, that flows down because I'm painting at an angle. We want to keep that. We want to paint top to bottom and let that fall. That's going to create a smoother wash for us, right? And you're also going to see as I get to the bottom, as I'm going through this, I'm kind of jiggling my brush, right? That's going to remove a lot of straight lines. If I'm constantly doing straight lines, our eyes are amazing at connecting elements to create these lines in perspective or whatever else. we want to make sure that we have enough wash, and as we go down, just kind of let that puddle fall down. And you'll notice here that I'm not going back up and touching a lot of what we have up here. Anytime we touch a wash that's in the process of drying, we're going to leave a brush stroke. So if you want a smooth background or a smooth wash, you want to leave that alone for a little while. And you see here, right? I forgot a little paper towel, so I'm going to use this table curtain. I'm going to dry my brush for a second. And one of the things you do to pick this up at the end, if you don't want it to, a dry brush becomes a sponge. And I can just pick up that little bit at the end, right? So that is the first exercise that I suggest people to do before they think about what am I painting or whatever else, right? Is this simple process of doing a dry flat wash will teach you a lot about how fast your paper absorbs the water, how long it takes to dry, and how smooth you can get this wash, right? And again, I'm working at an angle. Usually at home, I'm working at an angle probably close to this. If you like the textures, right, you want to create some washes and get all those little textures and balloons and edges that happen, you know, use salt and stuff like that, then you want to lay it flat and let it dry in puddles, so to speak, and that'll give you a lot of textures. But if you're looking for a flat, controlled wash, which is generally a much more difficult thing to do with watercolor, this is a very easy way to do it, right? And it's also going to teach you to control a little bit of that water content on your brush, right? So I'm going to use sort of the same amount of, I'm going to wet that same blue, which is kind of a nice dark blue. And I'm going to wait for this to dry a little bit, but I can do it again. I'm going to start a little bit lower, right? And it's the same puddle of pigment. But again, I'm just going to kind of go across. I'm going to let that get a little bit more fall down. And we're going to do that. And in general, right, I'm just going to leave it at a little bit of an angle here. Right, don't want to touch it too much. That drop has kind of fallen here, right? And I can control it, like, it doesn't have to be the entire width of this. I can just let it do its thing. And I'm going to dry my brush again and just kind of touch the end to pick up the little bubble, and we'll let this dry. And so what you see here right now a little bit is that on a simple wash using the same color, I'm starting to get value, right? I have a light blue, which is the same amount of water, and I've just layered it. And this is the next sort of level with watercolor. Watercoloring is about layering. You're very seldomly going to get it all in the first wash. You want to build up these layers. As you get better, what might have taken you 10 or 20 layers to do might take you fewer, right? Or depending on what you're going for, you might have lots of little things. So what I have now, what I've created down below here is the beginnings of maybe a landscape. Maybe it's a cliff in the background here, or a mountain or a hill rising up that I'm leaving here. I'm just leaving negative space, right? But it's blue, it's not white, right? And so one of the exercises is to continue doing this and just layering, see how dark a single color can get. This is an exercise that I do if I get a new color, right? I buy a new tube of paint, try it, and I'm gonna do this over and over and over again to see how many levels I'm gonna go through to get a really deep color. Because I can, if I want to, just literally the little bit of water and just a lot of pigment on my brush right now. This is about as dark as this pigment actually is, right? That's the blue, right? But with water, I can slowly get there and I can control how many levels it takes. That is sort of the challenge I think that most people get when they first start watercolor is like, how do I get that? Control watercolor, I have to kind of give into it. These are little tricks to kind of help us get there, right? And so eventually, if I do a watered wash over watered wash over watered wash, I'm gonna get to this really dark value, okay? But I need to kind of get used to how much pressure on my brush and getting used to just crossing my fingers and letting it dry and not going back in and messing around with it, right? Especially if you want to, I'm going to do one more over here. I'm just going to kind of, my brush. And the brush I'm using right now is a calligraphy brush. It's a Chinese calligraphy brush that's generally meant for ink, right? Calligraphy, doing those really nice characters, but they're also really, really, really great for watercolor. In calligraphy, your brush needs to hold a lot of ink because you don't want to run out of ink halfway through some of those really complex characters or a sentence or whatever you're writing. And that goes very well with watercolor. And if you notice when I filled this area, I didn't constantly go back to my palette and come back. Every time you touch your palette, you adjust the amount of water and pigment, and you might pick up some additional color in your brush, right? So we want to keep, if we want to keep a consistent color, we want our brush to hold a lot of pigment or enough pigment to fill this. So if I'm using a small brush and I'm trying to fill up this area with a smooth wash, I'm constantly going back, right? There's no way the amount of liquid and fill in this brush can hold enough to fill this area, even though it's not that big, right? So let's do one more to kind of give you an idea, and then we're going to actually kind of create a little mini scene with just 3 washes here. We're going to get some water, get some of the same blue, and I'm just going to kind of control it a little bit as well. I'm just going to kind of start there, right? And we're going to kind of fall down, right? So now we have that. I'm gonna wash my brush, dry it. I'm just gonna pick up a little bit of these bubbles at the end. And here, I didn't let the previous layer dry a little bit, so it is blending down here instead of like being a hard edge. Notice up here, there was the first area where I was painting. It was dry, and so the edges up at the very top, they have like little plateaus and mesas and vistas now. It's hard edge, but down here, it didn't quite dry yet, and so it's bleeding and blending, which is fine, might be an effect we want, but now that leads us into the next little exercise, right? So now we have that. But again, this is the same color, just controlling the amount of water. I'm actually being very consistent with the amount of water in the same puddle, and we've created more value, right? You can kind of see that out there, see a little beginnings of a landscape, right? One of the great things about a landscape is that there's no, you don't have to be careful about proportions or things like that, right? Which is why a lot of watercolors and a lot of watercolor in the beginning of your journey, you pick trees and landscapes because there is no exact rule for what the branch does or how many branches per tree or things like that. So you can be a little more free, and those are great ways to create with watercolor without worrying about, as opposed to a human's face, right? If one eye is a little bit off, we're so used to looking at human faces that our eyes are gonna tell that immediately. And so one of the things when people ask me, like, how do I get better at maybe doing more comic book stuff or doing more human stuff instead of landscapes, the first rule is to draw, right? Watercolor is really difficult to fix your mistakes, right? Unlike acrylic or oils where you can white something out and restart it, or, it's opaque, you can go over it again. Watercolor, you can't. Whatever I put down as the first layer, it's gonna peek through. It's all transparency. So therefore, what you want is to have a drawing or it's a subject matter that you're familiar with enough, that you're confident enough, that you're not going to change along the way. With watercolors, you don't want to fix things while you're painting. So if you draw a sketch of a face, you want to have the confidence that that face, all the elements are in the right spot, right? And then you just worry about lighting and coloring as opposed to, oh, I'm going to fix that eye, or that nose is crooked, or what's the expression on his mouth, right? So that's what we're doing there. What we want to do next is we're going to do something called a graded wash. We got a flat wash down. We can do this over and over. We're going to do a little bit of a graded wash, and I'm going to do it right next to it. And for this, I want some clean water. My water's a little bit dirty, but we're going to start off with a nice intense red, right? We're going to do the same thing. We're going to do one or two back and forth as if we're starting a flat wash. And I'm going to wash a little bit of paint off my brush. I'm not going to go back to my palette, just more water. And then I'm going to kind of come back and continue this as it falls. Okay, went back twice, wash it, a little bit more water, and I'm going to go down. And if I had a really clean water, this last couple washes would be really, really clean, right? And I'm just kind of going to make my way down. And one of the exercises here is to learn how to control the amount of water in your brush so that you can get a nice smooth gradient as you kind of go down. Because again, if I go up here and kind of mess around like, oh, I want to move forward, I'm going to all of a sudden disturb that, and I'm going to have a brush stroke, right? So that's not something you want to do. You don't want to paint it over and over and over again like you would with acrylic. You kind of just want to let it flow. If it didn't hit the way you want it, hey, we can do the same thing over. We can go over it again, right? So we're going to let that kind of dry right there. We're going to dry our brush, pick it up at the bottom. Now this fell, so this is a graded wash, and let this dry. We do another graded wash, we do another graded wash. We get more intense colors near the top, less intense colors near the bottom, and then we can weave a nice gradient and control, right? The key thing here when you're learning is, how do I control the uncontrollable, right? Because that's how we perceive watercolor in this way. I'm hoping this can dry a little faster. Can someone give me the time? Just give me a 124? Okay. Let me know when we hit like 135 or so. I'm going to turn this now upside down. Here? Okay. I'm actually going to paint down here. Now I did a graded wash, turn the page upside down so that the angle to me is still the same, but what I'm going to do now is do a yellow graded wash, right? And I'm just going to do it on half of this red one, but I'm going to do an intense yellow at the very top here, and then just a little bit of water. Just kind of go back and forth. Wash my brush a little bit of water. Okay. Right, so now we have a nice dark yellow to light yellow, and we can control that in this area. If I want it to be a larger thing, I just figure out how many back and forths I do before I wash my brush and kind of go back and forth. But what I have now, guess what? Let's say I'm painting this way. I have a very nice controlled gradient from red to yellow with an organized orange in the middle, right? That it slowly shifts from this. And if this was again, if this was a little bit of a landscape, there's a sun somewhere over here, it's setting off to the right, this is a horizon line, we can probably get a few. So moving your paper, letting gravity be our assistant and let it flow with you is a great way to kind of control. I have, with 2 colors, right, 2 pigments, 2 washes, and a lot of water, I now have a variety of colors here on the gradient for the sky. I have it blending in the ground, and maybe in the foreground now I have just this red element, right? And we can choose whatever colors there, right? So with these two skill sets, a lot of my artwork is kind of created just moving it around and just, oh, what direction do I want this gradient? Where do I want it to drip? Where's my lighting and everything else? And working that process. It's just in a lot smaller brush strokes. Right? In this case, I'm using my biggest brush I have here. But what if I did this on a much smaller level around the eye, right? Think of eyeshadow, right? That small little gradient that you might have on a female superhero, right? Or in the jawline. The last thing I'll give you before we start painting some fun things, right, is edges, right? How do I maintain a hard edge? We kind of have a little bit of it here, but sometimes we want something curved or whatever else. There's a technique with two brushes. I'm going to take one brush. I'm going to fill it with water so it's loaded. And I'm going to take another brush, and you got to work relatively quickly. And I'm going to choose a green this time. What I'm going to do is just draw a line, right? I'm going to just, as if I were inking it, and then with water on the other brush, I'm going to touch it as quickly as possible, right? And I'm going to blend it out. Right? Come back in with my other brush to kind of add that in. But what this does, you kind of do this a couple times to get a smooth gradient coming away from something. The concentration of pigment on the far edge of things will be a little bit sharper, and I'll have a nice hard edge to define the boundary or border of an object. This could be a head, a shoulder, whatever have you, or even the beginning of something really, really bright. We can do let's see here. I'll do one here. We'll do that. Add some clean water here. We'll do it on the other side. We'll add some, you got to move quick before it dries, otherwise you won't get this nice blend, right? And then we have, what do we got there? We got a little lightsaber. Easy, right? We'll just round it off at the top. I'm literally just drawing the edge of the lightsaber here. Quickly with a wet brush on the other side, we'll just do that. Right? Right, simple, easy. We got this. To try to put some of these in practice, what should I practice on? What should I draw real quick? I have about 20 minutes, I'm assuming now. A half hour? Huh? 1:30. Okay, great. So I have a half hour to kind of try to take these basic lessons, if you will, flat wash, the graded wash, creating edges. What should I paint? Oh, give me some idea.
Would you mind doing a bug?
A bug? Like a scarab or something?
Sure.
Okay, one of the things I realized is that my phone, for reference, that I might use is being used to stream right now. So, sure. Is there anyone else that has something? An idea? A request?
Dragon?
A dragon? That's always fun. That'll be a good one for scale. I'll do a little bit of both. Oh, okay. I'm going to do we're going to do two things. Okay. because most likely, in order to do things a little quicker and more efficiently, you have to let things dry, right? We saw what happens when I thought something was dry. So we're gonna do a quick scarab, and then we're gonna do a dragon, someone said. So we're gonna do that. So first, can you see my line work up there? I don't know. Yeah? All right.
What kind of pencil do you use for your sketching?
Sure. I use a relatively soft lead. It's a 2 millimeter lead holder. It's HB, the basic same grade of lead that in most pencils. But what I like about the lead holders is that the lead is a little bit wider. I don't sharpen it to a point, right? The point, whatever natural point occurs. What I don't want to do, and why I actively don't use a mechanical pencil anymore, is because sometimes they're so sharp, they'll dig into the paper. And if you dig into a paper, which is another technique, you'll create ditches that the pigment falls into, and you make inadvertent lines. If you ever paint something you thought was smooth, all of a sudden you get a strong line that appears out of nowhere, is because there's most likely a little bit of an indentation on that piece of paper, right? And the pigment kind of fell into that, right? With watercolor, we want to work from light to dark, and so I'm going to do a few things here to kind of okay. And I think they have some sort of interesting antenna. Okay. Okay. So we kind of have that. And again, the structure is pretty solid. I'm confident with what we have here. And we are going to start painting. And what I want to do is think about first light source, right? You notice me rotating the paper so that the angle towards me. The light source, generally warm colors for light, and I pick a cool color for the shadow, right? So what I'm going to do first is just get a little bit of a yellow, right? I'm not even concerned about what color this scarab is right now, right? I'm just painting the light and the shadow. So I'm going to get a little bit of this, and all I'm going to do is do a graded wash right now, right? So I'm just going to kind of hit here and do this little graded wash. I'm going to leave a little bit of this top area as an edge for a really bright highlight. Rinse my brush a little bit. Right, kind of let it drip down a little bit more. Maybe a little bit of a wash my brush a little bit more. And again, I'm just letting gravity be my assistant and help me with that. I'll leave a little. I left a little bit of some white spaces on there for some texture, but we'll do that. And I'm just kind of following it down, right? So we have a nice graded wash here. And before I can do too much else, actually, we're going to let this dry, right? And we'll come back to it, okay? So now we're going to do a dragon. So literally, sometimes it's that wash. If it was a more complex piece, and you see me doing like, I'll work on this part, I'll do a graded wash here, and maybe there's some rocks or some leaves or whatever else, and I'll work on another part while that part dries, right? So I don't always just like do one thing and put it to the side. But if it's a complex figure, it's a bunch of these little things. Oh, I'm going to do this graded wash for the face, right, to get the lighting in on that. And then I'm going to move to his boot, right? And then I'm going to move to his hands and use the same pig. So I'm always moving around. So you ever see my my speed paints, either on Instagram or on YouTube, you'll see my hand just going all over the page. And it's not because I am ADD on the art. Is because I just have to let that area dry before I come back to it, Okay, so we're going to put this to the side for a second. And someone said dragon. So we are going to do that here. And if you need your phone back, feel free. Thank you so much. Right, and again, you'll notice I just want to make sure I have the references for the structure. I used to worry about like, oh, I'm going to shade things in, where's the shadow and everything else. We'll figure that out a little bit later. All I'm trying to figure out right now is here's an eye, here's a nostril here. We have some fangs. We're going to get some spikes and horns here. And even up here, I know there's going to be a mane. I don't need to be specific with that right now because I want to let some of the organicness happen with the brush. I'm just going to do some brush, see where it dries. For me, as long as I have the figure 50% planned out, I'm pretty good. 40% of my painting is reacting to some of the things that happen, right? Right? And the last 10% or so is a little bit of luck. We got to cross our fingers, even for me, that everything dries the way I expect it to. Right? So we're going to have something like that. Right? We have a couple of teeth here. We have a chin. Right? And a little something like that. And then we have these neck plates, right? So pretty thin. Some scales, right? And again, this is where some people might need a little bit more to be confident in these lines, right? It's about confidence, not about illustrative competency. I just need to be comfortable that I'm not going to shift this eye lower or these teeth are going to be wider or something like that. I just need to know that there's enough here for me to go on, right? When I first started, I used to be an inker, right? I used to do a lot of inking and pen and ink, and I used to everything needs to be planned out before I put ink down and everything else. Now, after painting for several years, my pencils have gotten so much looser, and I can start painting much quicker, right? So there we go. We have that. One of the tricks I also do, if my pencil lines are a little bit heavy, I use a thing called a kneaded eraser, right? So we just clean it up a little bit. But my trick with this is to roll it into a cylinder, right? And if my pencils are too heavy or whatever else, or there's a lot of sketching and erasing that I didn't do, I want to pick up some of this graphite, right? So it doesn't mess around with some of my ink. And so what I'll do is I'm going to crush this over here. I'm going to roll this eraser over it, and you'll immediately see that this area is a little bit lighter than the pencils I had here. I just need enough to be able to see what's there. So I'll roll this just to remove some of that heavier lead, right? And we'll do that. All right. What color should this dragon be? Red? Okay, we'll do a red dragon. Start with a brush. I'm going to choose watercolor. We work from light to dark. So again, we're going to start with yellow. I know you wanted red. We'll get there. But again, I'm thinking about light source. It's a red dragon. I'm going to think about light source. I'm going to use yellow, and I will use purple on this one for the shadow. But we'll have the light source coming from this side, right? And it's going to be hitting, so this side is going to be yellow, this edge of the neck here is going to be yellow, and so that's what's going to happen.
Do you do paper prep, and if so, how?
Paper prep, one of the things I do to avoid paper prep is that I use something called blocks, So they're sealed all around, so it's not a single piece of paper. I've broken it up a little bit, but there's actually like 3 pieces of paper here to keep it a little stiffer, right? And this block, if you can see, is just there is just a thick black. It's probably about 10 pages together. So using the Arches watercolor blocks when I travel is a great way to do that, right? So this is hot press. And as we get into things, stick with watercolor paper. If it says mixed media, leave it for the mixed media artists. It's watercolor paper for watercolors. And if you are uncomfortable using really expensive watercolor paper, my advice is generally use the most expensive, or if it is expensive, use most quality watercolor paper you can afford to mess up on. Because if you save the good stuff for when you're ready, you'll never get there. And there's so much nuances in keeping your paper consistent that you want to make sure that you maintain as much consistency in your tools while you're learning, right? Later on, you can mess around with a lot of other watercolor paper, right? So again, this is kind of a flat wash there. We'll change that into a little graded wash for some of this. But yeah, so now it's going to be a graded wash as I pull this yellow, dry my brush a little bit, across his face to kind of set, hey, this is where the light is hitting and spreading across, right? We're getting that. The light is going to be hitting his tongue a little bit. What time do we got? 16 minutes. Okay, great. And then we have a little bit here, and then we have a little bit down here. We're going to go quicker. All right. And we'll do that. And we're just going to create some textures up there. And I'm using the same yellow here, and that's going to indicate our sun. All right. Easy. Let's go back to the scarab. Work at an angle. I'm going to do one more soft wash on this. I'm going to use a slightly different color. I'm going to use a burnt orange. And I'm going to start a little bit lower, just like I did in my examples, and just kind of do that. And again, rinse my brush, and I'm going to do a graded wash as we make our way down here, right? And dry my brush, and I'll pick this up. Right? And so now we have that. Sometimes with these big brushes, I'm just gonna quickly add a little bit out here for the legs, right? But now we've settled that down. This is going to look great with a darker background to pop this out, so I'm going to choose a Payne's Gray for now, and I'm going to work in a nice little gradient coming off of it, right? So I'm just going to use a Payne's Gray, and we're going to right, and if I wanted this to have a lot of texture right now, I would just lay it flat and let it dry, and we're going to get a lot of textures out of this. But as I get this, I want the darker areas to be close to the edge of this scarab, right? I'm going to control that, get some water, and fade it out, right? A little bit of Payne's Gray, put it in, leaving some, and we'll fade that out as well. right? So this is just a really quick and rough graded wash that we're doing here. But again, everything is just a series of controlling small areas of a larger painting, right? That's really what we're doing. Any other questions out there?
Excuse me, when you're down to the last few pages of your block,
Yep.
does the block protecting and not having to tape still work, or does it not work when you're adding rotation?
It sticks to the backing as well, which is the cardboard. Okay. But there's a nice little trick as well if you want to, if you're not too worried about it. Watercolor paper, or if you buy decent watercolor paper, is made of cotton. You know, what happens when a garment you're wearing is a little bit too wrinkly or it doesn't lay flat the way you want it to? You steam it or you iron it. And if you take your paper, turn it over upside down where the paint isn't on, spritz the back of it with a little moisture, and take your iron on low and iron your artwork, you can make it flat again. And then you can turn it back over and start painting again if you want, and then it'll buckle up or whatever else. But ideally, there's the whole taping it down and structure and everything else, which is great, which you can do. But there's tons of little tutorials on how to do that online, but I haven't really seen one that talks about the fact that you can iron your artwork, which I have done. Okay. And since I'm working a little bit flatter here, you can see where these extra little textures have come through, right? And we'll let that happen, as opposed to if I just worked vertically. I'm going to choose a shadow. I'm going to raise this up a little bit more so I can do this. My shadows, I said, is going to be blue, so we're going to do this. We're going to get some of that same blue we used before. And I'm going to do a graded wash the other direction. This light's hitting this way, shadows on the other side, and I am just going to kind of overlay that. And all of a sudden we start getting some volume to this, right? In general, there's lots of little tricks that we can learn as artists in color theory. Blue generally recedes, warm colors generally come at us, right? Direction of light and everything else like that. I've left a really bright edge of white, so that makes it seem like that. And then we have this, okay? And that's just with one simple little graded wash, but I was able to control the curve, right, of this blending of this yellow to blue, and I'm starting to see little bits of green in here, right? And again, there's only like 2 colors that I've used in here, 3 colors so far, right? So doing this, you can see the process now. I do this over again, I let this dry, do this over again, maybe change the blue to a slightly purple thing as we get there, and we'll get all these wonderful little grains playing out. But the trick is to let it dry, right? If we don't want it to inadvertently blend. So it takes a little patience to put it to the side. At any point in time, I'm working on 2 or 3 different pieces. When I work on commissions here at a convention and back at the hotel or wherever I'm staying, there'll be 3 or 4 different pieces in various stages. So I can be like, okay, did a couple of things here, now we gotta move. And so if you're a little ADHD like me, maybe then this fits great into our world, right? But you can see kind of what happens here. And we're going to apply kind of the same thing over here, and then we'll leave with one last bit of information. So, some people hear about using a hair dryer, right, or a heating lamp. I eschew that. I say no. The moment you start drying this with a hair dryer, you're fixing where those pigments are on the page at that position, right? As opposed to letting it naturally dry, you're giving it time to blend. Like it's slightly shifted a little bit more since the time I put it off to the side, versus if I just did that blue and I immediately came in with a hair dryer, it's not going to be able to do that so much. You can do it then if that's your goal, like, oh, I just want it to stop right there, and like, fix it. But in general, especially at these early stages, I like to give it as much time as the painting needs, right? It'll do its thing. And then if it's really, I want something controlled and it's blending too much, that's really when you use it. But for the most part, in the beginning of my journey, I did have a hair dryer ready to go at my holster, right? But now, I just let it naturally dry. Let watercolor do its watercolor thing, because it's one of the most, watercolor is very unique across all the other mediums out there, right? Oh, I do acrylics, but it looks like oils, right? Or little oils, and it looks like it's painted acrylic, or digital, it looks like an oil painting. But watercolor always looks like watercolor, right? You don't make it look like acrylic or whatever else. So I try to maintain that. Even if I over-render certain areas, and you've come by my table, I'm just outside on the other row, you'll see a lot of detail in certain parts, and you can definitely over-render a piece. But I always try to leave parts of my painting a little bit less structured, right? All right, so I'm trying to find sort of where the darkest shadows are at the moment. And I think I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. Normally I spend more time with this and blend it out, but, you know, whatever. And in general, I'm working top to bottom, and I'm just trying to do this. A little bit of a faded wash, graded wash, adding more watercolor as we get down here, right? All right. I do wish at this point I had a hair dryer just so I can speed this up to get us to the point. How much time do we got left? 5 minutes? We can go a little bit over, right? You guys don't mind. A little bit over. So when we have the lighting, the color of light that hits an object, right? In this case, it's a warm light. Our eyes kind of tell us, hey, there's a yellow light that's really big here. It's shining. And we've created a new language with this visual piece that anything purple is now the shadow. And someone said they wanted a red dragon, right? What does that? So this goes into a little bit of highlights, midtones, and shadows, right? The highest saturation, the majority of your color happens in the midtones, not the highlight, not the shadow, right? So if you think about dark at night, you're walking through your place, everything's like bluish and purplish. There's not a lot of color. Even though you have something that's bright red with very little light, it doesn't look red, right? Just barely. If you have something and there's a really bright light shining on something, right? A strobe light, or think of something very intense. When you see something in that color, what happens? It's washed out. Right? There's not a lot of color there. There's enough, and our mind puts it all together, whatever. But if we just have a nice mid-tone of light, just an average light, then that's when the red things seem really red, and the blue things seem really blue, and our colors really pop out in that middle area. So when we have, what I think of it as is when we have light washing over from the left and shadows washing over from the right, it's in the middle where they mix and blend. That's where the red happens, right, for this dragon. That's where the color of the object happens. So now I'm going to use a slightly different brush. Generally, as I work through a piece, I start with large brushes, and as I get to the details, it gets smaller and smaller. And then when you really end details, it's more just like drawing and inking almost. You're just kind of hitting small parts. So now I'm going to get a red. And I'm going to focus on, in this case, just where these things are meeting, right? And right, I'm going to do some scales here that are red. All right, I'm primarily focused, let the purple stay the shadow. And I'm just going to kind of hit this middle area there. Maybe I'll do a little bit in the shadow itself and whatever, but let's just focus in that middle area. What is sort of happening now, if you can kind of disassociate with what's going on and what your mind's doing, it's going, oh, this is going to be a red dragon. Even though there's barely any red on this at this point, right? Or we'll blend the red in over, and then that was kind of a flat wash, right? And now get some water, and I'm going to blend this out, and this becomes a little bit of the graded wash process, right? And if I want it to end, I dry my brush and just pick up the end of it there. Pick up that little bubble of water, right? And there, slowly, right, as we start getting into adding actual color, we haven't done anything with color yet, really. We're focusing on light and shadow. In this case, my shadow is purple. In the case of the scarab, my shadow was blue. But now you can pick like, oh, what if my light was orange? What if my light was green? What if my light was pink? Now it doesn't, you're not even thinking about the object. You're simplifying the process, right? And then you go like, oh, okay, well, if something is, my light is really pink and it's a bright pink and a warm pink, well, then let me pick something like a cool thing for a shadow, but I can pick a cool green for a shadow and see where that takes me and play with that, right? Because watercolor is transparency, and in this case, that's what we're using to our advantage, right? And again, one of the things I really love with watercolor is the fact that with just a few colors here, really three, we have this purplish red, we have this orangey yellow, we have this pure red on things, right? And we have these little gradients that have developed. If I were to do this in marker, I would need a marker for every single one of these colors in those areas, because you can't really blend too much with markers, right? So we got that. And then down here for the last little bit where we talked about creating edges, right? Let's say this scale, this large chest plate that we have, I'm going to grab a warm brown in this case. We could probably do it in purple. But I'm going to do that. I'm going to get my brush, fill it with some water. I'm going to draw a line and then fade it out. And now I have a hard edge on top for that scale, but the rest of it has blended down into that, so as if it's casting a shadow, right? And I can let that dry and then do it again, and maybe in this case we'll add a little bit of purple in here as it gets close to the purple, so it's the same purple. I don't have to think about color theory too much. Oh, shadow is purple, right? And so I add a little purple on this edge because it's closer to shadow, and all of a sudden I have a nice little shift. I'll touch it a little bit there with some purple and there. And voila, our piece is starting to form a process, right? For tackling something that is chaotic, that seems uncontrollable, but we did it with a very sort of procedural way. Hopefully that helps a little bit. And we're going to do this with this scarab as well. We have a little bit of blue, we have a little bit of yellow, and you know what? This really works well because if I do a green scarab, a little emerald scarab, blue and yellow make green. So really, I could just keep doing this back and forth and it'll create a green naturally, but I can also force it with a certain type of green. We're going to do that just for the sake of this. And I'm just going to do a flat wash, kind of in the middle. Right. And there, and there. Right? And now we have this green, and we can work on that, and this will become a green scarab. Even though it's painted with yellow, even though it's painted with blue, finally we can punch this a little bit more in a few key places, and we'll find that mid-tone that defines, that tells our mind, right? We're playing tricks on our mind for a lot of this stuff. Tells our mind where and what color this object actually is. All right? How's that? Yeah? I actually have a watercolor course. It's 5 hours of this, basically me mumbling like this, from start to finish, along with a lot of the exercises similar to the one I just showed you. It is the best way to get to it, because I forgot I have it here. There you go. If you can scan that, that's great. Otherwise, if you go to my Instagram, I don't know, does that work here? There. If you go to my Instagram and my profile, you can click it and you'll see a link and it'll take you to it. It's like $8, $7 or something. It's super affordable. You'll spend more at McDonald's in a meal, right? You'll spend more at a drink here. So that's the basic process that I kind of think my way through. There are like little nuances and little ways to break these rules. But in general, this kind of basic rule of highlight, mid-tone, shadow, choosing a color for your light, choosing a color for your shadow, and then trying to figure out those basic shapes and with washes and graded washes. It sounds simple, but that'll get you 80% of the way there. If you have any questions, I'm just outside, a few booths down. You can come always and we will chat the rest of the day. Or you can come up here and chat a little more if you want to see what I have up here. And I also, don't forget, I have a comic as well. Thank you. Does anyone want these? Yeah, people do? All right. They're barely finished, but whose birthday is it this weekend? Your birthday? Oh, you're a dragon. Okay, well, you get the dragon. Anyone else have a birthday this weekend? Anyone have a birthday last weekend? This month? September? October? Okay, well, ironically then you suggested a scarab, so you'll get the scarab.